Sound Speeds, and welcome back to the Sound Speeds podcast, a member of the Geeks Rising podcast community. Let's waste no time and get right into our content. Recently, I received a comment from a fellow sound pro challenging my thoughts that the sound mixer should be audibly slating the scene number as opposed to the second AC. The second AC is the person who holds up the sticks in front of the camera, slaps them after saying something like, "Scene 47 Bravo, take one." Then they slap the sticks. And traditionally, it has been the role of the second AC to do this. But in the modern workflow, that doesn't need to be the case and shouldn't be the case. It should be the sound mixer that does it. Why is this? Well, let's go back to the film era and start there. In the world of film, originally it was silent films. There didn't need to be a sync point. They would simply roll the camera, and then the people would do the action on camera, and then usually the director was talking over the whole thing, telling them, you do this, you run around, you do this, take this from them, whatever. As soon as we started adding sound to it, there had to be a way to synchronize the two of them together. Now, I did do a video called it was about MOS, basically, the origins, the real origin of MOS. You can check out that video right there if you're interested. However, one of the things I mentioned in that was that there had to be a way to synchronize the two, and I'll let that video stand on its own. But the main point is that it involves something called the Slate or the sticks. The second AC, or one of the camera assistants at the time, would simply slap the sticks after calling out something like "Scene 47 Bravo, take one." Then they would slap the sticks, and by slapping them on camera, the film would register. They would simply match up the frame that the sticks would go all the way down to the sound roll, the tape-based sound roll of the actual sound of it hitting. They would match the two of them up, and they would know that as long as they were in sync from that point, everything after that was going to be in sync. And that worked well for decades until digital arrived. And in digital, all you really need to have is zeros and ones pass at a certain data rate to make sure that the audio is going to be lossless. But there's something else you can add in that is a few extra zeros and ones in the form of metadata. Metadata is basically words. It's some sort of data, or it could be the fact that you're recording at 24-bit, a polyphonic broadcast wave file, sampling at 48 kilohertz, and what the frame rate is of the project and the project's name and whatever you wanted to put in your metadata, is including a sound roll. But here's the reason why this should fall onto the sound mixer. Sync is basically because sound was added to picture. And when the digital workflow started up, you needed to have time code be added into both picture and with sound. And time code is generated from the sound mixer or a standalone sound code or a time code generator. But regardless, it starts in the world of sound. And then from there, it's jamming out to camera. So we take sync boxes and go out and jam cameras, or we just let them ride and they remain on the camera. But this carries the time code to the cameras. So time code is now automatically synced between sound and camera all the time. It's never going to be out of sync. And no longer do they manually watch on camera for that sync point in the, from where the sticks go, and they match it up by sound. Now, this day and age, they simply say, okay, well, this is the take we care about. Let's print this take and let's print this take because they like the way that it looked in the visuals. And then they simply go into the system, synchronize by time code, and then pull the audio and the picture that match for that particular take. And then you have your sound and you have it matching picture. But what does this have anything to do with the sound mixer calling it out as opposed to the second AC? Well, let's talk about that. If a second AC calls it out, what happens? Well, camera rolls, they slap the sticks, and then you go. But what if the sound mixer is not yet recording? Or let's just say, because of the modern workflow, they say, roll sound. Okay, well, no one's rolled just yet. And after a couple of minutes, the sound mixer says, I'm going to hold the roll because nothing's happening. Or what if camera, which also happens this day and age, camera just starts rolling without the first AD calling it out and saying roll. They just go ahead and say, roll the camera, slap the sticks, and let's go. And the sound mixer doesn't necessarily know that you're recording. Unless they have a pre-roll on their recorder and they actually hit it, you would be missing the beginning of this. And that does happen sometimes because the sound mixer is focused on other things, or might be talking to a producer or somebody standing there, and they might not have, done the bells and, lights, and there could be a whole bunch of reasons as to why the sound mixer is not rolling. And this has happened before. I've worked with sound mixers before that didn't know that they were rolling, or because no one actually said it they said, rehearsal's up. Okay, we're going to rehearse. And the sound mixer's just been mixing and not realizing that camera went ahead and slapped the sticks. And then they say, oh, great, that's great. Let's move on. And no one actually said for them to roll, but the camera says, oh yeah, they were like, that was a brilliant take. That's great. I wish we'd recorded it. And the camera says, we did record it. Oh, okay, well, great. Let's move on. Well, sound didn't record it because no one actually called it. There's a whole bunch of reasons as to why that is. But here's the thing. If the second AC calls out scene 47, Bravo, take 1, and slaps the sticks, you don't know if the sound mixer is actually recording on their sound recorder. The only way you're going to actually know that is if the sound mixer hits record, right? Because you're going to hear it. But if a sound mixer just hits record and lets the second AC slate it, here's what happens in the modern workflow. The metadata that is on the actual take itself, on the sound roll, has to match up with picture, and it's got to have the accurate metadata. But sometimes what will happen is camera will change a lens, or they will make a small setting adjustment. They'll change the ISO, or they'll change the focal length or something like that. They'll make some zoom that is minuscule, but and they'll go ahead and just progress a letter without telling anybody. They won't tell the script supervisor. They won't tell anybody. And then all of a sudden they hold the slate up in the front and they slap it, and no one knows that they changed it. If the second AC calls it out, the script supervisor may catch it. The sound mixer may catch it, but they might not. One of them may miss it. And the only way to be 100% accurate that the sound mixer did actually see it, and it's going to match in metadata to what the camera has it as, is if the sound mixer calls it out. And you may say, well, if the sound mixer is listening, again, there could be a whole bunch of reasons as to why that may happen. Sound mixer may have their cans off, and they may be talking to a producer right there. I've observed that happening and not heard the little ding noise that indicates that they're recording. But if a sound mixer calls out the audible slate, as opposed to just hitting record, then the boom operator knows to call sound speeds, and then they roll. Because I've been on set before where where the second AC has gone ahead and slapped the sticks, and I said, hold on a second, we're not rolling yet. They haven't called it, or the sound mixer hasn't hit record yet because the first AD hasn't called it yet. So when the first AD, I will stop the second AC and the camera department from rolling when we're not ready, because it hasn't been called yet. I will stop that if I observe it. So it is very important that the sound mixer actually call it out to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that the camera department doesn't just progress a letter because they feel like it, in which case they write it on the slate and then just go without the script supervisor even catching it sometimes, or the sound mixer catching it sometimes, or the boom operator might not be able to see the slate. Because that's happened too, where I'm not in front of the camera, I'm just grabbing the sound. I might have to come in from the side or something like that and might not be able to see the slate, but I'll swing over to catch the sticks. So if a sound mixer just hits record and then the second AC calls it out, there may be a lapse in there where somebody doesn't know something. And it's only when the sound mixer calls it out and then you visually see it as matching, or the script supervisor will hear the audible call and the camera department will have it on the slate and the script supervisor catches that, will you actually know that everything is in sync? Because the metadata can indeed change, but only by driving it and pulling it to someone's attention will you actually notice it. So does a second AC really need to call it? This day and age, there's a lot of reasons why they don't need to. It should be the role of the sound mixer, because if the sound mixer simply hits record, sometimes they don't have the bell on that dings when they hit record. Sometimes I can't hear it. There have been many mixers I've worked with that don't want to hear that. So I don't know if they're recording or not. And if the second AC is simply calling it out and slapping the sticks, I don't know if they're actually rolling or not, unless I say, hold on a second, sound mixer, are you recording? And then they would have to say, yes, I am, or no, not yet, or something like that. How do I know? How do we know unless you hear the tone, the little beep tone that indicates that you're recording or cutting, and that if the sound mixer audibly calls out the slate? Because once the sound mixer calls out the slate, the boom operator knows that they're recording, and that's when we're going to say, yell out sound speeds on set. If a sound mixer just hits the record button and then we yell out sound speeds on set, we don't know if it's going to match metadata. We don't know if they suddenly progress a take number, and we just didn't know that. Sometimes camera does not have the right feeds going to the sound mixer, so the sound mixer can't even sometimes see what's going on because they slap the sticks and then the picture goes live. I mean, sometimes there's weird things that happen like that, and they'll sometimes say, okay, well, the camera can see, so let's go. And then the sound mixer's like, I need to have a picture before we can roll. And then sometimes they're like, we can't do that. There's even been shows that I've worked on before where they tell the sound mixer, well, because this is kind of a kind of a delicate scene, we're not going to let anybody see except, the director and the DP. Sound mixer needs to see what they're mixing. And sometimes they've tried restricting that. And sometimes, for some takes, some sound mixers will say, okay, fine, just go with it. I'm just going to be booming it anyway because we don't have lavs on. So all they do is they ride the level. And they say, it's not going to be a big deal. My boom operator has this. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why in the modern workflow, we should have a sound mixer call out the audible slate. But those are the big reasons right there. For our second segment, we're going to talk about boom operators. Now, we all know what a limiter is, right? If a sound gets too loud, a limiter basically prevents any sound from exceeding a certain level by basically cutting it off. Or at least in the analog world, it used to basically cut off the signal so that way it would not hit above a certain bit and it could sometimes sound like it was clipping. But in the digital world, normally it squashes it down and kind of, prevents it from hitting a certain level. And usually it's not as destructive as long as you engage the limiter. Sometimes if it's like an analog limiter, it will cut off a little bit because of the nature of the ADC. I'm not going to get into that, though. We also know what a compressor is, though, right? Where basically you squeeze down the whole level. Basically, you squeeze down where above a certain threshold, it starts to squash down that level. So basically, you have full dynamic range until you hit a certain level, and then it's going to start reducing by a certain amount or a percentage by a ratio. So maybe 3-to-1. So if it's peaking by 3 dB, it might go down just by, it might go down to 2 dB, or it might go down all the way to 1 dB, or it might just hit a certain level and not go above that. It just kind of depends on how you set the thing up. Now, the reason I wanted to kind of set that up by saying we know what a limiter and a compressor is, because a boom operator has an internal compressor that they need to use when they are on set booming. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say that there's regular dialogue in a regular voice and people are just simply talking. Boom operator is going to maybe, fly right over the top of the head, maybe right at the top of the head, maybe 3 inches overhead, 6 inches overhead, whatever the case may be, depending on the microphone, the selection, the background noise, the styles, everything. But what if they get overly loud? Does the boom operator just stay right there and let the level do what the level is going to do? Normally, what you end up doing is the boom operator will back off on the microphone a little bit, so that way the level maintains about the same level on the recorder, on the mix. Now, why do they do this? Because if your sound mixer sets a level and they are simply riding the level up and down a little bit, they want to make sure the mix is always going to hit at -12, -14, -15, -18, whatever their threshold is that they're trying to not go above. That is going to be the level that they want to mix to. If someone yells, it's going to suddenly go way up in here and it's going to peak too much. Some mixers will say, well, I'll just bring it down. I'm not worried about that. I'll just bring down the level a little bit, and they will. Some mixers, or I should say, most mixers will actually say, boom operator, don't just stay there. If he gets loud, you need to go up loud. You need to go up high so that level is maintained. So that way, as opposed to the level that peaks around here, all of a sudden they start yelling. Now it's peaking up in here. If you back off on the microphone a little bit, it's going to go back to peaking here. Now, what is the big deal on that? Why don't you just let the sound mixer bring it down? Because when the sound mixer brings it down, it changes the noise floor. And if they're mixing in any amount of microphones other than just the boom, or even when post gets it, if they are not going to use the ISO, if they're trying to use this mix for some reason, and you suddenly start changing the levels, it changes their noise floor. Once the sound post team is going to start to adjust their levels, and once they set it the way it is, they don't need to adjust it. If suddenly you change the noise floor in the middle of they're going to say, whoa, that just messes up my processing and everything. So you need to maintain a solid noise floor without it adjusting at all. The way to do that is by allowing the level to stand, where the sound mixer does not need to adjust the trim in the middle of the take. they might need to adjust the level a little bit, but the trim is going to maintain. And if they can try to not use their faders at all, that is going to be ideal. The way to do that, though, is by having the boom operator rise the boom up and down to match the level as to what is necessary. So if the person gets loud, boom operator starts flying up to the ceiling until it hits a certain level. And then once it's at that level again, maintain up there. As soon as the person's volume comes back down, that's when you drop the boom back down. Therefore, it's very much like a compressor in that sense. Boom operators, the best ones out there, will ride up and down according to the volume of the people that are on camera talking and the noise level. So this also would have something to do with the fact that sometimes people will yell and then they will shoot a gun, or they'll say a line, then they'll shoot a gun. Well, in order to properly do this, boom operator is going to point the microphone at the face, catch the dialogue, and then for the gunshot, it's not going to be the same gunshot as the one that they use in the movie or TV show, right? So at this point, they're going to fling off, and point off axis, because whenever you go off axis, it drops a few dB, anywhere between usually 10 and 25, depending on the microphone, something like that. And by swinging off axis, you're going to be protecting that diaphragm quite a bit. And by giving yourself some distance, it's going to back off on that a little bit more. So if you do that, you're going to have a better chance of preserving the microphone and not having it blast out and blow the microphone. And then you swing back over and catch the rest of the dialogue whenever the gunshots are done. But you don't just tell the sound mixer, you make the level adjustment and I'm just going to stay right there, because the microphone could still get blown. You don't want the microphone to get blown. So the only way to avoid that, absolutely, is by backing off on the microphone, flinging off axis. That's the reason why it is very important for a boom operator to pay attention to the rehearsals and to use their internal compressors. So there we go. Another episode of the SoundSpeeds podcast in the can, down and out. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in 2 weeks with yet another episode. And in the meantime, I will be bringing you all kinds of extra information about sound. And as always, sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.